The two brothers trudged near the river, their faces withered by burdens beyond their years. Temujin, the eldest, was seething with fury. "He snatched it away from us again, Qasar. How can we live together?" said Temujin. The younger Qasar offered no words of consolation, though, as he simply clenched his jaw and resigned to his reality. As they reached the crest of a hill, Bektar came into view. He stood alone quietly, unaware of the brewing storm. Temujin and Qasar lowered their heads and inched closer. Quietly, so as not to be detected, they prepped their arrows to their bows and aimed squarely at the unsuspecting traitor. Suddenly, Bektar turned to face them, spotting his younger brothers a few bounds away. His softening expression quickly turned into horror as the arrows flew straight into his chest. Bektar slumped to the ground, his lungs immediately filled with blood. Just as quickly as the color drained from Temujin's face, so too did Bektar's life slip away. And that was the day the world first tasted the brutality of Genghis Khan. But it wasn't the last. This ruthlessness did not come from nothing, though, as the harsh realities of life molded Genghis Khan into the man we know today. In the world of the Mongolian steppes in the 12th century, survival was not a right but a hard-earned privilege. This was the life into which Genghis Khan, then known as Temujin, was born. His early years were filled with hardships, shaping his life in ways that would echo through history. Yesughi, a tribal chieftain, was the father of Temujin. He had two wives, one of whom was Holun, a woman he had kidnapped from another tribe. Holun became Temujin's mother. At the age of 12, Temujin married a girl from a different clan named Borte. As father and son were journeying home from the wedding, they ran into members of the tribe from which Holun had been kidnapped. Recognizing Yesughi as Holun's abductor, the rival tribesmen feigned hospitality and invited them to a feast in honor of Temujin's wedding. However, their seemingly friendly offer masked a deadly intent. They poisoned Yesughi during the celebration. Losing their patriarch was already tragic on its own, but the rival tribe decided to put salt into the family's wounds by banishing Temujin and his mother. Holun was forced to raise her 7 children alone in the steppes they called home. Condemned to death in the coming winter, survival in the rolling hills and rocky outcrops became a daily struggle, and every morsel of food became a precious commodity. In this unforgiving environment, young Temujin and his half-brother Bektar, along with their other siblings, were tasked with keeping their family alive. Despite being barely teenagers, they hunted and foraged, their childhoods forfeited to the grueling demands of their new existence. However, Bektar, being the older half-brother, would often hoard the catch. One day, Temujin and his younger brother Qasar returned from a hunt empty-handed because Bektar had stolen their fish again. This was the last straw that angered Temujin, prompting him to conspire with Qasar. After all, in the face of relentless hunger, he had to develop a certain ruthlessness. Temujin and Qasar stalked their half-brother and killed him. Learning about his son's crime, Holun scolded the young Temujin as she believed this would bring ills to their family. True enough, Bektar's murder turned Temujin into a criminal as the Taichud clan, Yesughi's former allies, hunted him down. They captured and restrained Temujin with a kang, a heavy wooden collar. After a decade in captivity, he plotted an escape with the help of 2 guards, Jelme and Baorchu, who knew his father well. He managed to slip past the search parties and rejoin his mother and Borta. However, the Merkids would soon attack his family again. But Temujin would survive this by hiding in the mountains. Afterward, he strategically built alliances with powerful leaders to increase his standing. Despite tensions and betrayals, Temujin triumphed over adversities and consolidated power through his military victories and inclusive leadership style. He gained popularity by instituting laws that favored loyalty, ability, and fairness. After a series of political and military maneuvers, he managed to absorb the armies of his enemies and unify the Mongolian clans. Recognized as their supreme leader in 1206 by the Mongol Council, the Kurultai, Temujin took the title of Genghis Khan. His reign led to the defeat of the powerful Jin dynasty and the Khwarezmian Empire, paving the way for the largest contiguous empire in history. Yet, it was also marked by brutal tactics aimed at absolute control over conquered territories and peoples. One of the most chilling aspects of Genghis Khan's reign was the mass extermination of the Tartar tribe, almost turning them extinct. The Tartars, after all, were notorious adversaries to the Mongols, but most importantly, they were responsible for the death of Genghis Khan's father. As a result, Genghis Khan harbored a lifelong grudge against the Tartars, which played out in one of the most brutal acts of his reign, ordering the execution of all Tartar men who were taller than the linchpin of a wagon wheel, about 3 feet tall. This essentially meant that almost all Tartar males above the age of childhood were put to death, an act of mass murder that served Genghis Khan's twofold purpose. It satisfied his desire for vengeance for his father's death and worked as a brutal strategy of fear to consolidate his rule, making it clear that disobedience would be met with grave consequences. Furthermore, the elimination of Tartar men left their women, children, and wealth to be absorbed into the Mongol Empire. This only strengthened Genghis Khan's forces as many Tartar boys were indoctrinated into the Mongol military machine. Genghis Khan's brutality wasn't just reserved for the Tartars. He extended his wrath to the Khwarezmian Empire following an incident. An act that truly captured his ruthlessness was the horrific punishment of Inalchuk and the ruthless domination of the empire that followed suit. In 1218, a 400-man caravan of merchants arrived at the gates of Otrar in the hopes of establishing peaceful trade relations. They revealed they now answered to Genghis Khan, the man who united the Mongol riders. However, the governor, Inalchuk, driven by suspicion or greed, decided to execute the entire caravan save for one. He then sold their precious cargo for his own profits. The lone survivor managed to reach back to the Khan and reported the unfortunate incident. Shortly after, 3 Mongol messengers arrived at the palace of Shah Muhammad, the supreme ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire. The Mongol messengers implored the Shah to make peace with Genghis Khan, asking him to hand over Inalchuk for punishment. Despite hearing about Genghis Khan's utter domination over the Jin dynasty, the Shah decided to do something terrible. He ordered the arrest of the 3 Mongol messengers. Deciding to make an example of them, he ordered one to be beheaded. The other 2 should return to Genghis Khan bearing the insult. Their beards were shaved as a sign of disgrace, and they were sent back carrying the severed head of their companion. When Khan learned of this, all hell broke loose. Genghis Khan retaliated with a brutal military campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire, unleashing the force of his Mongol horde. While the Shah readied his forces at the Dzungarian Gate, expecting the Mongol warriors to pass through the narrow valley, Genghis Khan had other plans. He ordered his forces to trek through Tian Shan, a cold, mountainous area. There, a force of 30,000 strong marched ahead. The first clash began through the Fergana Valley, leading the Shah to withdraw his army from the Dzungarian Gate and repel the incoming Mongol forces. Ultimately, both sides fought equally and each returned to their camps. What the Shah didn't know was the army that repelled his forces was just Genghis Khan's vanguard troops. Soon, the horde of Mongol warriors passed through the Dzungarian Gate, ready to punish the perpetrator that spat on the great Khan's face. They arrived at Otrar and encircled the city, severing the supply lines. While the walls held the Khan's forces at bay, it wouldn't be long before the city crumbled from within. Months went by and traitors who grew tired of the siege opened the city gates, prompting the Mongol forces to charge through. Townspeople were massacred as everything broke into chaos. Inalchuk retreated to the citadel with his remaining troops but was eventually dragged out. As punishment for his thieving, Genghis Khan ordered his men to pour molten silver into Inalchuk's eyes and ears, his face caving into the heat. Genghis Khan wasn't finished, though, as his next target was Bukhara, the place where Inalchuk sold the plundered goods from the Mongol caravan. The Mongol forces arrived in no time, bearing the wrath of Khan. Khwarezmian prisoners were used as human shields while the Mongol forces approached the city walls. Genghis Khan addressed the city. "O people, know that you have committed great sins. If you ask me what proof I have for these words, I say it is because I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed these sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." The Mongol forces ravaged Bukhara, killing, enslaving, and violating the inhabitants. Genghis Khan then turned his sights to the capital city, Samarkand. However, he soon learned that the Shah had fled into the wilderness, so he ordered some of his troops to find him. Meanwhile, the main Mongol forces busied themselves, finishing what remained of the once powerful Khwarezmian Empire. It was a swift, deliberate massacre that only spared a handful of artisans and a few women to be taken as concubines. Eventually, Shah's family was captured, his sons murdered, his daughters taken as concubines, and his mother exiled to Mongolia to live in poverty. The Shah eventually fell ill and died. Genghis Khan's legacy is steeped in blood and terror. His actions were responsible for countless deaths and unimaginable suffering. Forged by the harsh circumstances of his early life, Genghis Khan sprang from nothing into the man, the brutal ruler that we know today. We hope